acquitted on all charges. The origins of the January in Thomaston, Georgia, he and his brother his Facebook status to say he was in a relationship and regularly posted very together. A job as a plumber at Gutters and Roofing Inc. and married in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to in shock. Mary had to visit the police station. Their relationship, at times nearly ending, then reigniting with new passion. The next day, dinner ended in tragedy. But Mary Catherine hated and possessive girl waiting for her to calm down. Despite 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the evidence was presented against her, deliberated and during the commission of a crime, to walk out of the court concerned for her well-being. Secretly, he began checking whom she was interacting with and went silent. Approximately 100 meters from the road and nearly a 5-hour drive from the location he allegedly took her. Tariq Jot Singh was arrested and held in custody pending trial. Investigators determined that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Tariq Jot Singh death of the young woman. It was found that on the day of the kidnapping, Singh had purchased zip ties, tape, Singh terms of understanding what desires were it, placed it in another device, and left it at his home. His lawyer described the act as a crime of passion and appealed for a more legal daughter. Jasmine Kaur Creek is hard. The couple welcomed their first child together, where specially resolved the issue, but laid down suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girl. He suggested on all charges. But let's return to this joyful note to the origins of the story and try to understand together what led the young woman to the defendant's bench and whether it could have been prevented. Stephen Andrew Freeman was born on January 1st, 1995, in Thomaston, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother biking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to say he was in a relationship and regularly posted various photos with his beloved. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend. Steve's parents, in turn, also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young people moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drainwright Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary, she knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried hoarsely. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped, not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock. Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where the girl, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life. She would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine, as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt concealment. Mary was detained and remained in Spalding County Jail during the trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Lieutenant Wilson vehemently contested Mary's claim of it being an accident and tried to prove her guilt in the deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied. Bullets were loaded, inserted back into the pistol and placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she indeed was preparing dinner for Stephen that evening. the very dinner that was found scattered on the kitchen floor, explaining the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary until the very end. Their relationship, at times nearly ending, then reigniting with new passion, became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often quarreled over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a drama. She screamed at Stephen and attacked him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act, driven by Mary Catherine's anger. But her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life, known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pled guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently. She repeatedly claimed it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her. She claimed he hit her twice and even forced himself on her. On the day of the tragedy, he allegedly attacked her, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the act, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and fired at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that there was physical evidence supporting that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. As physical evidence, the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding were presented. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence that Stephen was not attacking Mary, but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's version was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment and finally believing in what was happening, Mary Catherine took a risky decision to give truthful testimony in court. With tears in her eyes in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant, and with certain evidence, she managed to do so. The defense stuck to the self-defense narrative, presenting the argument that erupted into a scandal between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, I experienced all kinds of pressure imaginable. Verbal insults, physical attacks, been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, and Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic over the last few years, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and once, after an argument, she pointed a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine obsessively called Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, in Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she missed an important detail: paired food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed. Likely he was waiting for her to calm down, but Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck on the left side since he hadn't turned to face her. In her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting. Hence, he couldn't have been. The case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages, and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Chris had in effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict: not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. On the first charge, malicious action, the defendant was found not guilty. On the second charge, serious action, the defendant was found not guilty. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked. Watching the woman who took her son's life walk out of the court afford a comfortable living in the bustling city. The young people spent a lot of time together, hanging out at work and catching up at cafes between university lectures. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. By April 2020, the young couple was no longer hiding their relationship and started planning a future together. Jasmine was smitten with Tarek Jot's attention and care. He continuously expressed his devotion and love. Initially, it seemed like he was just very caring, but gradually his attentiveness became more intrusive. Tarek Jot started inquiring about Jasmine's every move, justifying it by saying he was concerned for her well-being. Secretly, he began checking whom she was interacting with on social media, and then started demanding reports on her every step. Jasmine felt that Tarek Jot's behavior had crossed all boundaries, but he managed to convince her every time that his total control was purely out of love and care. He would apologize and promise not to invade her personal space without reason, but these were just empty promises. Over time, Jasmine felt increasingly suffocated in her relationship with Tarek Jot. He strongly opposed her interactions with family and friends. This isolation deeply hurt. A car swiftly made its way through the city, adeptly avoiding surveillance cameras. After an hour's drive, the car came to a stop. The young man exited and helped the girl out. She was weak from the prolonged lack of oxygen. With cold efficiency, he retrieved tape and a cable from the trunk. Without a word, and with brute cruelty, he sealed her mouth and eyes with the tape, causing her eyelashes to stick together and pulling tightly on the delicate skin of her face. Then, the man tied her hands behind her back. She writhed in fear. Silence. There was nowhere to run. He pushed her, and when she fell, he tied her legs with the same cable. The victim moaned and squirmed on the dusty road. Her long, dark hair tangled, and her clothes became dirty. After binding her legs, he grabbed her hair and with a swift slash cut across her throat. The victim went silent. He placed the knife in a bag ranges. He led the police to the burial site, where they discovered Jasmine's shoes, glasses, and work ID badge in a trash bin, along with zip ties. She was exhumed 2 days after Tarakjot Singh was interrogated by the police at Morialta Creek, 40 kilometers north of Hawker, approximately 100 meters from the road and nearly a 5-hour drive from the location he allegedly took her. Tarakjot Singh was arrested and held in custody pending trial. Investigators determined that in the days leading up to her disappearance, Tarakjot Singh had meticulously prepared for the abduction and death of the young woman. It was found that on the day of the kidnapping, Singh had purchased zip ties, tape, and rope from a hardware store. Searches conducted at the residence where Tarakjot lived uncovered several SIM cards and phones, proving that he had carefully planned the abduction, even going as far as changing his SIM card to fabricate an alibi. On the night of the abduction, Singh switched cars with his apartment neighbor and asked him to cover his shift, then headed to the elderly home where Jasmine was working that day. Initially, Singh was charged with failing to report a death to the coroner before the charge was upgraded to homicide. Following the investigation, 21-year-old Tarakjot Singh from Karalta Park was charged with the homicide of 21-year-old Jasmine Kaur after her body was found buried at Morialta Creek. Singh first appeared via video link before the Port Augusta Magistrates Court on March 9th, where Judge Gregory Fisher ordered the accused's name and face to be withheld. Horrific details emerged during the sentencing at the Supreme Court. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo stated she had to be acutely aware of her hopeless situation, and she must have consciously suffered from what can only be described as absolute terror. Mateo also mentioned that the act was inefficient, and Jasmine Kaur was made to suffer. It is unknown when her throat was cut, unknown when and how she ended up in that grave or was placed there, and unknown when she was dug out, other than the accusation suggests that it must have happened while she was still alive and being prepared for burial. During the initial investigation into Jasmine Tower's death, Tarakjot denied any wrongdoing, continuously asserting that she took her own life. However, Judge Adam Kimber stated that Singh prepared a series of calculated steps over a certain period of time to commit the crime. Prosecutor Carmen Mateo informed the court that Miss Kaur had filed a police report claiming that Tarakjot Singh was stalking her on February 9th, about a month before she was assassinated. She said that Singh began cold and clinical planning of Miss Kaur's death after their relationship ended. The manner in which Jasmine Kaur was murdered indeed involved an extraordinary level of cruelty, she added. Martin Anders, the attorney representing Singh's interests, stated that 2 months before the tragic incident, the Singh and Kaur families had a meeting that resulted in a negative decision regarding the continuation of their relationship. He also mentioned that Singh's reasoning was seriously impaired following the end of their relationship. This is not someone who was really well-grounded in terms of understanding what desires were at placed it in another device and left it at his home to engage cell towers that would create the impression he was at or near his home. He punished her, a defenseless, innocent girl for rejecting him, she said. According to the prosecution, he forced her into the car, kept her on the back seat or in the trunk, took her a significant distance, ended her life, buried her, and disposed of any evidence that could implicate him in this crime. Judge Kimber sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His lawyer described the act as a crime of passion and appealed for a more lenient sentence, but the request was denied. Relatives of Jasmine, who was buried alive, were present during the sentencing. In her statement, Jasmine's mother welcomed the verdict. "Today I don't feel happy. I wish I wasn't making this statement and that Jasmine was still here with me," she said. Rajpal Kaur told the court she is haunted by the thought of what her daughter Jasmine Kaur experienced in her final moments. "I go through the terrible sequence of events, wondering when she realized she was in mortal danger," the statement read. "There was no one to save her. She spent her last hour on this earth with the worst of humanity. Jasmine is gone, and I am devastated with grief. She was a precious little girl." Rajpal Kaur stated that Singh was obsessed with Jasmine, who had rejected him 100 times. She lost her life because Tarak Jat wanted to force her into marriage and force her into a relationship with him, she said. Mrs. Kaur stated she would never forgive Singh for what he had. The terror she must have felt when she was abducted, tied up and held in the car during the long drive to Moralin Creek is hard to fathom, said Judge Kimber. I cannot describe the horror that Miss Kaur must have felt when she realized that you were burying her alive. The court heard that Singh did not reveal details about how he abducted Miss Kaur from her workplace or what he did with her in the subsequent hours. However, Judge Kimber stated there was clear evidence that she suffered greatly and was forced to endure a long car ride while bound and gagged. After the sentence was announced, Judge Adam Kimber said it was clear that the crime was premeditated and that Singh took steps to conceal his horrific actions. The enormity of what you did must have been clear to you, said the judge. The need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group. It's tragic when addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who strive earnestly to help. The once prosperous and happy Amado family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could handle the situation without external help. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was regrettably too late. This isn't a story of mere addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never personally met. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was a chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. The family home bloodshed. On January 25, 2019, a concerned man contacted the Seminole County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home, departing so hastily he even forgot to collect his pay for the day, implying that the owner had taken them. Grant was declared a person of interest and a search was initiated for his whereabouts. What's known about the Amato family? Margaret Ann Amato, née Wade, and Chad Robert Amato tied the knot in the mid-1980s. Margaret, 2 years senior to Chad, was already raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a previous marriage. Chad wasn't deterred by her having a child. Instead, he was ready to raise Jason as his own. In 1988, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Cody, followed by the certain privileges. They had to adhere to family rules, excel in school, help with household chores, and exhibit good behavior. They strived to be the pride and support of their parents. Both parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager in a prestigious private clinic, while Chad, initially a clinical pharmacist, later shifted to software specialization. The family was quite affluent, living in a spacious suburban home with their own stable, breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. Private interaction, of course, came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction, compounded by regular alcohol consumption. But Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family, spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum: find a job soon, or he'd have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. His parents, seeing this as better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. Once everything was in place, Grant pretended to be streaming, asking for privacy. But in reality, he was locked in his room, indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. Trip to Japan, her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant constantly fabricated stories, losing touch with reality. He claimed to live alone in a large house, own a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. He backed up his claims with money transfers, initially sending a couple of $1,000s, then $10,000 and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed by his parents, as he was using their accounts. At first, he explained it as investments in his own online project to attract an audience, but Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. Scandal, escape, and rehab clinic. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The patriarch demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave, but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction. However, they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment of their intimate private online interactions that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amatos decided to inform Sylvie that her admirer, who had showered her with money and gifts, was not a businessman, but an ordinary unemployed man with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds return. On January 5th, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant made an abrupt return home, having completed less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his complete lack of compliance. Grant tearfully vowed to turn his life around and find employment, but threatened to end his life if forced to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed, but laid down. Remember the previously mentioned home gun collection? Chad had kept it in a special large safe, the key to which he trusted no one. However, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, always kept loaded by his father, and it was this gun he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office when her youngest son quietly approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Next was his father, who was about to return home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face to face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move, devising an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody, the only person who had always stood up for him, helped him, and been his best friend. By then, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To lure Cody home, Grant used his now deceased father's phone to send several messages asking him to come home immediately because something terrible had happened. He didn't elaborate, confident that this information would be enough to make his brother rush home from work. Grant's calculation was correct, and Cody indeed arrived, even leaving work early. Entering the house, he only made it to the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He had time to realize the horror of the situation, but was powerless to change it. After eliminating his family, Grant coldly wiped his fingerprints off the pistol, placed the weapon in his brother's hand to leave his prints, and then left it next to the body, making it look as if Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, the killer calmly packed his things, downloaded video files of his communications with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted the girl. Having finished his affairs, he loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. Arrest and trial. It took the police just over a day to track down and arrest Grant, who was hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He wasn't surprised, more disappointed that he was found so quickly, but he vehemently denied any guilt. During his interrogation at the station, he spun unbelievable tales about his father's incredible cruelty, alleging mistreatment towards him, his mother, and brother. Grant also spoke of his father's attempts to separate him from his beloved girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to share true and pure love with. Regarding the events at their family home on the evening of January 24th, 2019, his account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested that his father and brother had a fight, Cody grabbed a gun, and ended Chad's life, with Margaret being an accidental victim. Grant claimed he could only guess the chronology of these horrific events, as he wasn't a witness himself, stating he spent the night in his car with his belongings after his father kicked him out. In the morning, he said he simply drove away, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded at home. His story sounded disjointed and implausible, and the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. As a result, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. He was held on a $750,000 bond, which he was unable to post, and thus remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial commenced on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant, including his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had stolen money from during their trip to Japan. Those who knew the defendant personally described him as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief, and a liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to his younger sons. This transaction occurred late at night when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, the defendant had used his deceased father's finger for identification. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and needed treatment. The final verdict was delivered on August 12, 2019. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.